Howdy, fellow pushers, wherever you may be. I'm Grant Lindenberg, and this is Pushing Cardboard number 25, San Diego Histcon and Jason Matthews. Along with our usual features and chit-chat, I'll have a roundup of my experience at the recent SD Histcon event, and an interview with the co-designer of the highest-rated game in Board Game Geek history. Coincidentally, this is the first episode of Season 3 of the podcast. Our anniversary was November 11th, so I guess I'm averaging an episode per month, despite trying to post more often. Still not too bad. I'm still going. The response to my call for folks to fill out a survey last episode was great. I got 9 registered responses and 6 anonymous ones, which felt pretty good. I did a random roll on my Discord server, and the winner of the Saladin game giveaway was Dave Brown. So, Dave, I've emailed you to get your address, and I'll get your game sent out to you ASAP. Thank you again for taking a moment to do the survey. There's another one up for this episode, so everyone please drop by and fill it out. It's very short. You can log in beforehand or respond anonymously. It's totally up to you. I can't promise a prize draw every time, but I'll see what I can do going forward. I really do appreciate the feedback. If you've got a question you'd like answered or a topic discussed, drop by the website or drop me a line at grant@pushingcardboard.com. And I always like hearing from you. News. As well as San Diego Histcon, the other popular convention for history gaming last month was Compass Games Expo. YouTuber Aardwolf covered it extensively. I suggest you check out his channel for replays of his live reports, including a whole segment when his co-host Dan Capaldi had a dead audio connection and couldn't be heard. Aardwolf soldiered on with interviews of attendees and designers and whatnot, and Dan was left dancing in the background. That's dedication to the hobby for sure. I heard from someone at Lock and Load that everything over there is okay, they're just behind schedule, but everything will be delivered. As for Devil Pig Games and the Heroes of Normandy series, things don't look so good. No update on what I reported last podcast. It pretty much feels like they're kaput. So, I don't know. Stay tuned for that one, but no news seems to be bad news on that front. At the Rally the Troops website, there's another new game added, Angola by Brian Train. And despite the initial rumor being that only one game of any series from GMT would be ported to Rally the Troops, I've heard a very strong rumor that Plantagenet is in development over there. So along with Nevsky, the Levian campaign series will have 2 games, Nevsky and Plantagenet. So excellent news, as RTT is a great way to play those games. While I was down at SD Histcon, I managed to record 4 interviews. They don't really have news, but there's lots of interesting tidbits in there, and lots of stuff about designers and publishers and how they do things. So I'll release these over the next few episodes, starting today. What's on the table? I'll go over everything I played at the convention later. I'll just highlight a couple of my PBEM games that are still going on. Pete Wagner and I are still playing Last 100 Yards Airborne, but with the arrival of Last 100 Yards, the Russian front on many tables, I'm thinking I might want to completely skip over the Pacific box for now and try Russia next. I'm really intrigued to see what I think Mike Dennison, I think, is the designer there. I'm really interested to see what he's done in terms of nationality characteristics for the Russians. My Crossing the Moro historical ASL game is in its last couple of turns for the first scenario. I had some really good luck with my fighter bombers on his last turn, but then he managed to move into the ground floor of a building where I have a 9-1 and my radio and a broken squad upstairs. So I desperately needed to rally them on my turn, but no luck. It's going to be pretty hard to rescue them. I'll also say I'm quite enjoying the British way, much more than I thought I would. We've played the Palestine scenario and are now on to the Malaysian one. It's such a tense game, and yet there's more to do and more choices to make than I thought I'd have in such a short coin game. I suppose it helps that it's all 2-player, so each of you is very engaged every turn. I recommend it, and a pretty easy way to learn coin as well. New games to the collection. A couple of ASL items this month, both the latest Winter Offensive mini pack and the new Action pack. I need more scenarios like I need a hole in the head, but I guess I'm an addict. Can I claim I'm just buying them to get the boards? From David Thompson and Trevor Benjamin, their latest two-player game, General Orders World War II. Yes, it appears to be lighter than my usual fare. It's been described as a worker placement war game, but I've learned to never underestimate these two designers. And if you're in Canada, it's even better than usual, as Osprey, their publisher, has a Canadian arm. So you can order the game in Canadian dollars, and the shipping originates in Canada. So no costly cross-border shopping, or cross-border shipping, I should say. That's a real bonus every time I order one of the Undaunted games from these guys as well. Two items from GMT's P500 list showed up. Great Battles of Alexander Deluxe, which includes a ton of expansions along with the base game, and it's one hefty big box. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the latest Last 100 Yards expansion is here, the Russian front. This one requires you to have the first two games, so it is a true expansion. The new components are the Russian unit, it's a pile of new maps, and an updated rulebook 3.0, which covers the whole system. So you need the German units from the first two boxes. From Hist Games in France, I got the new Marengo game from Bowen Simmons, Triomphe of Marengo. Apparently, it's more than just an update of her previous game on Marengo, and it may be her last game, at least for a while. From what I understand, she's not designing anymore, or maybe she's just not self-publishing anymore, and we'll get more designs in the future, but I have small hope of that. Anyway, here's hoping. There's a lot of folks for whom Napoleon's Triumph is their number one game of all time. I mentioned a math trade I took part in last time. My final game from that trade arrived in terrific shape. Unconditional Surrender from GMT. Not a game I was totally interested in paying full price for, but certainly it caught my eye as a trade. And then finally a couple used games from the Panzer Grenadier series, Road to Berlin and Saipan 1944. I have a gaming buddy who's a big fan of the series, so I've now picked up 3 of these used at great prices. No excuse not to give them a try. Books. On my way to and from San Diego, I listened to a great audiobook, The Leary Valley by Mark Zwelke. It details the fighting by Canadian units as part of the British 8th Army to break through the Hitler line after Ortona and Battle for Monte Cassino. Well, the Ortona battle is justly famous in Canadian military history. The battle for Leary Valley was even bloodier, and yet it's somewhat forgotten. This was a great read and a great listen, though the reader they used pronounced lieutenant instead of lieutenant, and had real trouble saying Saskatchewan properly. But, you can't have everything. I've also read Zwelke's book on Ortona, which I recommend as well. He's a great new writer from the last 10 years on Canadian military history, if that's your bag. Newbie tips. Most folks who responded to the survey said they liked the idea of this segment. One old Gronyard rated it as their least favorite. My apologies to him, but we need to help bring the newer players along. Speaking of last episode, I've posted the beginnings of a glossary on the website. Anyone can have a look, but more importantly, if you're logged into the site, you can also contribute by adding new terms. I'll edit them, of course, but I see this as sort of a community project. We'll build it together. Likewise, if there's terms that you'd care to know more about and aren't comfortable making a log entry for, shoot me an email. I'll see what I can do. For today's newbie tip, let's talk about wargaming scale. Wargaming generally comes in 3 main scales: tactical, operational, and strategic. There's no cut and dried rules about these scales, and sometimes they mean slightly different things to different people. But what they mainly refer to is how zoomed in we are or aren't on the action. That can be zoomed in on both space and time, usually both. Tactical scale is the most zoomed in. It can be dealing with units as small as squads or even single soldiers. If it uses a hex map board, the hexes may represent 20 to 100 yards across. And the time scale is often variable, but generally quite short. A turn might be 30 seconds, it might be 5 minutes. Not very long at all. The size of units could be slightly bigger. There's platoon or company size units in these sorts of games as well. You think of games at the smaller scale like Combat Commander or ASL, and then up to I think it's company scale for the Greatest Day series from MMP. MMP calls those games grand tactical, but that's not a universally recognized distinction. I think it's maybe just for their own distinction. Who knows? One way to know if a game is tactical right away is if there's any ranged firing or line of sight rules. If you can only hit a unit in the next hex, it's probably not a tactical game. But if you can hit a unit a few hexes away, depending on line of sight, it is a tactical game. In between tactical and operational scale games, there's a group that I sometimes call battle games, but they're really tactical games. These can have a bit larger units, maybe battalions or regiments. Infantry generally can only fire into an adjacent hex or maybe one hex farther, but artillery can still fire at range. There's still a fair bit of maneuverability available for faster units. Turns here might be 30 to 60 minutes. For an example, there's hundreds of American Civil War games at this scale, as well as lots of Napoleonic battle games. Then moving up a bit in scale, we have the operational games. One clue that you might be playing an operational game is that there's suddenly supply rules. Units can generally only fire into the next hex. Sometimes artillery can go a little farther, but the units are generally larger, maybe brigades and divisions, sometimes even corps. The turns may be a half day or a full day or a week long, and the hexes represent a greater distance, maybe from 5 miles to 50 miles across. It gets a little fuzzy here as designers try to stretch either the time or the space and get more elements into their games. Games from MMP's operational combat system fit here, as do Mark Simonich's Zokbon games. If you think of that scale, those are generally thought of as operational games. Generally, these games encompass more than a single battle, more like a campaign. The Battle of the Bulge actually is a good example. Although it's called a battle, it lasted for 5 weeks. So games that cover the Battle of the Bulge, they often cover months. And Battle of the Bulge games are usually operational games. The most zoomed out scale are the strategic games. An easy rule of thumb to know if you're playing a strategic game is to check and see if you're playing an entire country. Strategic games often simulate a whole war or at least a complete theater. Think of games like World in Flames, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, or Triumph and Tragedy. The unit scale is often full armies. The time is months or seasons. Hexes can be 100 miles across or more. In addition, strategic games often have political elements not found in lower level games, and sometimes have options for production and technology. Confusing matters, there are strategic games that have operational elements, there's operational games that have tactical elements. There's not a sharp divide between the classes, so with some games it's a little tricky to pigeonhole its exact type. But I hope this gives you enough to have a better sense of what these game scales are all about. Okay, for the first main piece this episode, I want to talk about my experience at the San Diego Histcon. I drove from Calgary to San Diego. The trip down was beautiful, though extremely long, 24 hours total drive time. I went to Calgary, to Lethbridge, to the border, to Helena, to Idaho Falls the first day. And then the second day, I pushed super hard and drove for 15 hours. Idaho Falls to Salt Lake City, to Las Vegas, to Los Angeles, to San Diego. And because I'd pushed so hard, I arrived a day earlier than I expected, so I had a little time to spend in San Diego before the pre-convention mixer on Thursday night. Said mixer was at a lovely craft beer brewery place right on the wharf, just about 300 yards from my hotel. Just ideal. I met Harold Buchanan and his gang there, as well as some of the folks I'd be spending the weekend with, including Will Bauer and his partner Renee, and had great beer, great free pizza, and generally a great feeling of anticipation. Friday. The convention was only a block and a half from my hotel, so I packed up some games and walked over. When I arrived at the building, I didn't immediately see a sign. What I did see was a woman who looked as lost as I felt. We introduced ourselves, and she turned out to be a Twitter friend of mine, Natalia Wojtowicz. Please, Natalia, forgive my bungling of your last name, but at least I know how to pronounce Woj. Anyway, we went through the big main door together and discovered we were indeed in the correct place, and we stepped into the convention. My first scheduled game that Friday morning was with David Histcon. We had arranged to play Norway 1940 from Trafalgar Editions. It's a fairly rare game, and when we realized ahead of time that we both owned it and not played it, it was an easy choice for what to play together at the tournament or at the convention. We'd both studied the rules ahead of time, and they were a bit of a bear. Originally written in Spanish, the translation seemed fine, but the rules themselves were a bit spotty. Particularly lacking was firm information on setup and how units enter. We plowed our way through with much cursing and laughing. My Germans successfully invaded at Narvik, Trondheim, and Bergen, but were initially repulsed in Oslo. They made it on their second try. As we got more into the flow of the game, its use of air and sea units as well as the land forces worked very smoothly. There's naval combat units, transport units, and subs. The combat and transport units do the jobs you expect. The subs are used to detect enemy fleets. The air units have a variety of missions: interdiction, naval bombing, land bombing, sub-hunting, transport, probably more. All missions are resolved with straightforward die rolls. In general, you roll the die for air and naval units often, but usually only hit or succeed on a 6. So there can be a lot of dice checking for little effect. In the end, we only got through the first 6 turns or so before calling it. We both had other games to play, and we'd gotten through enough to feel like we understood how it worked. I'm not sure David will come back to it, but I hope to, perhaps via Vassal. I'm intrigued by how it manages to use air, land, and sea at this level. After dinner, I had another scheduled game, this time with Kevin Thatcher, someone I met in the Opponents Wanted section of the SD Histcon Discord server. We had agreed to play Napoleon 1807 from Shakos. Again, a game both of us owned but had not played yet. I took the French in the historical Eylau scenario, and away we went. This was another learning game that we got halfway through but didn't finish. Kevin and I both had a great time learning it, though, and went home both wanting to play it again. I'd play that game right now if I could. I look forward to playing it again, as well as 1806 and 1817. They've been sitting on my shelves for a couple years, and now I'm kicking myself for not having played them sooner. On Saturday morning, I didn't have a game lined up for first thing, so I had another look around, and I managed to do a couple interviews. I'll give you more interviews on the interviews and upcoming podcasts. I also took in some demos. Mike Manners, a fellow YouTuber and Twitter friend I previously only knew as Scratch Kitty, showed me his World War I air combat game, Richthofen. It's a bit like a World War I version of Down in Flames or Wild Blue Yonder, in that it's a card game and it has no board. Instead, everything is based on which plane is tailing and which plane is being tailed. It's a fun, quick game, and Mike has both a campaign game and a solo mode for it. And I'm happy to say I managed to help him out with a small tweak to his gun jam rules. I haven't played a dozen different World War I air games for nothing. As playing Mike's demo was so fun, I sought out Sam London, as I'd seen his Firefight Tactical on the table back at GMT West, and was interested in a demo of that. As luck would have it, Sam had tired of playing the first 2 scenarios of his game, and had set up Scenario 7, a much more detailed affair. He wasn't sure it was the best way to learn, but as I've played as many World War II tactical systems as I've played World War I air games, I felt I was going to be okay, and it turned out great. The game is a bit like Upfront in that it's cards and no map. It's a bit like Point Blank in that the terrain map is a grid of preset cards, so not like Upfront. But combat and morale are totally its own thing. And it uses a ton of dice, not like a dice chucker, but more like a dice drafting game. If you've ever played Steampunk Rally, you'll have an idea of what it's like. I love the game. I came very close to a win, which I think surprised Sam as well. Then I finally got to sit down with my online friend Mark Johnson for a couple games. First, we played Table Battles from Hollandspiel, and then Mark's copy of Age of Aces, or whatever it's called in French, which he brought, knowing that I love World War I air games. I've been listening to Mark's excellent podcast, War Games to Go, for years. I've loved his theme theories, and when I started my own podcast, I wanted to emulate his sense of professionalism in a hobby setting, as well as his excellent audio quality. While I can't always control the audio of my interview subjects in remote locations, I've tried to keep the audio that is under my control crisp and even. Check out his podcast. He's a great guy, and it was a pleasure to spend time with him. After dinner and another interview, it was time for the evening game. David Thompson set this one up. It turns out Mark and I are his favorite podcasters, So he'd invited us to a game of 1754. We had a fourth who didn't make it to the convention, so David dragooned Miguel into playing. Turns out Miguel is a local and had some good food tips for me later. The game itself was a lot of fun, 1754. It's one of those Academy games, the Birth of America series. The only downside was that it ended as a game from this series sometimes do, with Mark and I getting a double go on the final turn where we managed to grab back enough areas for the win. Fairly gamey, I suppose, but man, we had a great time playing the game as it was. And I should also mention, in terms of my game of Age of Aces or Time of Aces, whatever it's called, the game that Mark brought for me, it's a little tactical World War I air game from Victus magazine, and I don't think Mark liked it as much as I did, but what I want to say is that it's not that I thought it was a terrific game yet. It was just that I liked it enough to want to check it out more. The scenario we played, I was the Germans. I was chasing down a reconnaissance plane of his, a two-seater. I had 3 triplanes and he had a two-seater and a couple of escorts. But all he had to do was zip across the map and get off, and that was a win for him. Which gave me this being a magazine game, the map is quite small, and he could get across the map in about 3 turns. So basically, if I hadn't managed to shoot him down in 3 turns, he would win. I don't think that gave us the best understanding of that game. One of the things that I always like to see in World War I tactical games is the differences between the planes. And for Mark, he was driving his two-seater straight ahead as fast as he could. There wasn't much to see in terms of the difference between his planes and my planes. Anyway, I don't know if it'll be any better a game than Richthofen's War or something like that. But it certainly was interesting, and I'd love to give it a try on a larger scenario, or maybe even on a bigger map board. Anyway, that was great. Sunday. Sunday's when the convention starts clearing out, so my only arranged game for that day was for that morning. Bayonets and Tomahawks with Christina Carl. She'd not played the game before, so we played the first scenario with her as the French and me as the Brits. She was a terrific opponent, really engaged with the game, and full of history about it as well. We had such a good time, we went for lunch later, where I had carne asado as per Miguel's tip earlier. The game went back and forth a fair bit. What kept us in stitches throughout, though, were the several battles for York. I had inadvertently left my back door open, and she took York from me. I took it back, then she took it again, and then I tried 3 or 4 times in a row to retake it, but lost every time, despite having superior strength. On the final turn of the game, I finally managed to take it once more, giving the Brits a slim 1-point victory. Terrific game. I love Bayonets and Tomahawks. Hardly recommend it to anybody who hasn't tried it yet. After lunch, I got in a couple last interviews before we were tossed out at 6 p.m. We really did use every second. Since there was a few of us that weren't leaving until the next morning, we went back to the same brewery I'd been in for the mixer and had a great chat about healthcare, Europe, Canada, Woods, and of course, we played a couple of small games that Mark Johnson had brought along. And along with us, fittingly, was Natalia, who I'd started the convention with. A great final night as a cap to a wonderful convention. An excellent convention. I heartily recommend it to anyone who can get there. In addition to the folks that I've mentioned here, there were many more I didn't get a photo of or didn't get a chance to speak with, even some of them. But it was wonderful to spend time with YouTube's Zilla Blitz. Mike and I had a couple of meals together, shared war stories about creating the stuff we do for the hobby, and generally got along like a house on fire. If you've seen any of his videos, that'll be no surprise. He's an upbeat, really positive guy. I had a good talk with Jason Carr from GMT about rulebook writing and accessibility. I met Grant and Alex from the Player's Aid. I reconnected with Candice Harris of BGG, who I'd first met at GMT West. I got a chance to chat with Rachel Billingsley and Kai Jensen, both of GMT. And I spoke with designers such as Jason Matthews, Kevin Bertram, Steve Carey, Harold Buchanan, of course. I missed speaking to the amazing Dan Thoreau and to Dan Bullock. That was too bad. if I had a criticism of this event, it's it'd be great if it started Thursday. It's a long way to go for 2.5 or 3 days. But the other thing I should mention about the convention that was noticeable was because San Diego Histcon, they're really committed to expanding the hobby and increasing all the different ways we can think of it in historical games. That attracted a larger number of women to the convention that you'd normally see in a strictly wargaming convention. Anyway, that's all for this year. Who knows if I'll ever make it back, but I had a great time in my first go at SD Histcon. Okay, time for my first interview. Jason Matthews needs no introduction, having co-designed Twilight Struggle, one of the best-selling war games of the modern era, along with other games such as Imperial Struggle and 1960, The Making of a President, and others. Jason's games focus on the political. I'm pretty sure he lives in Washington, so I guess it's in his blood. Anyway, here's our conversation. All right, hello, Jason. I'm here with Jason Matthews. How are you?
Fantastic, Grant.
And we're here at San Diego Histcon, fall 2023. Have you been out to this event before? Or
I came last year for the first time and had such a great time. I was like, well, I'm coming back.
Yeah, Harold and the gang here, they kind of know how to do conventions. Yeah.
I think San Diego helps them all by himself.
That's true. I got here a day early and I went out for this great lunch on the wharf, and it was like, I don't know if I'm going to play any games. I might just keep going for lunch. It was so good.
Exactly. I had just come back from a trip to Poland, and the last thing on earth I wanted to do was get on another plane. And then the weather in D.C. dropped below 30 or dropped below 40, and I was like, "Oh, let's go to San Diego."
Yeah, absolutely. I'm hearing even more of that from all the people. There seems to be a big Minnesota contingent here, and they just got hit with in your numbers below 32. So yeah, they're like, yeah, I'm not going home. Well, I'm so glad to meet you. I'm a big fan of your games, and obviously want to talk to you about. You have a very sort of specific style with what you've done so far with Twilight Struggle, Imperial. Well, what's it?
Imperial Struggle.
Imperial Struggle. That's right. That's actually I played that one more than Twilight Struggle, but we'll sort of get to that. What brought you to the topic of Twilight Struggle? Like, how did you land on that was that your first design?
It is Ananda and I's first design, both of us. And it is not how we started. We both were super interested in card-driven games, and thanks to the insight of Mark Herman, we thought that they were particularly good at simulating political conflicts, wars that had a very strong political overtone. Of course, they all do, but in particular, like civil wars and whatnot.
Yeah.
So we started at the time looking at the Spanish Civil War, because back then there were not a lot of great games on the Spanish Civil War. Since then, the Spaniards have been busy designing games on the Spanish Civil War, so we've got it covered. But we started there. And I started diving into reading the history of the Spanish Civil War, the politics of the Spanish Civil War, and I realized I could probably spend the rest of my life studying the Spanish Civil War without grasping all of the nuances between the factions and whatnot.
So leaving it in the hands of the Spaniards might have been a correct choice.
Turned out to be the right call for me, although it is a fascinating conflict, and I'm glad to see so many great games on the subject now. But so when that happened, I think Ananda actually was the one who was like, well, what about the Cold War? And I'm a little older than Ananda, and so when he said the Cold War, I'm like, oh yeah, that's going to be crazy easy, because I lived through a big chunk of it. And if you study political science or international relations, in that 80s time frame, all we studied was the Cold War. That's all we did, basically. And so I was. From there on, the issue with Twilight Struggle was narrowing it, not...
Right. Yeah.
it's also, there's something about that game's focus. We're here at a wargaming convention, but the focus on politics, I think, the success of the game is because it's a great game, but I think there was a real untapped thirst and hunger for politics in conflict simulation.
Well, I think there were two things that were weird about it, and you'll remember, Grant. When I was growing up in the hobby, there was a whole subgenre of Cold War, Warsaw Pact versus NATO.
The Cold War gone hot
simulations,
right? Yes,
and there were almost as many as there were like Gettysburg games back in the 80s
totally.
and 90s. Yeah. So that waterfront had been covered, but no one had really done the Cold War as it turned out.
Right.
So there was this weird gap, and for a variety of reasons, which I have given a couple of lectures on actually, there's a weird bias about the relationship between politics and military in the United States in particular. That bias actually is reflected in our war games as well. It's nonsense. There is actually no distinction between politics and military force. They're the same thing. That's what Clausewitz said, and we've known it forever.
Right.
But somehow, if you put politics in a military game, people are like, what? Why is this here?
Right.
Well, this is the part that matters, actually. The moving of tanks is not the part that matters.
That's the tools.
Well,
one of the tools.
One of the tools, exactly.
I mean, when you get down to the tactical level, it's easy to separate out the politics, but the farther above you put yourself, above the situation, at a certain height, it's all politics.
Exactly. But even in an operational situation like Gettysburg is not about control of the town of Gettysburg. Gettysburg is about Lincoln's re-election, and that whole campaign is about Lincoln's re-election. And so if you divorce military strategy from political objectives and political thinking, then you've missed a big part of the conflict.
Right. While I have sympathy for the people who want to just play the military part, I also have huge sympathy for people who want more juice squeezed out of the lemon there.
Yeah, exactly.
Going back to while you were designing that, how did the two of you find each other as co-designers?
So we have a weird history because both of us, Anand and I, grew up probably 20 miles from each other in Southern California, and we went to the same game stores, and we never knew each other. And then we met. Eventually, there was a game club in Washington, D.C. that was run by George Washington University. We met there. Obviously, we both were interested in the same kind of types of games. We were both kind of war gamers that way. Ananda had gotten very involved in, back when Constant World was sort of where all war gamers hung out. Ananda was very active in the sort of GMT folders and that sort of thing, and he became a playtester for them, and I was his playtest opponent.
Right. Yeah.
So that's how it developed. So we were playtesters for Wilderness War and a bunch of other cool things, and but as much as Passive Glory was really like our thing, but as much as we loved games of that ilk, the things that GMT was sending us, they kept getting longer and longer and longer. And we were at a point where our professional careers were taking off. We're married, about to have kids, all of these things. So shifting from 6 to 12 to 18-hour games, that was not the direction.
You want to shift from 6 to 4 to 3.
Exactly, right. So while Twilight Struggle is considered a very long game these days, when we designed it, it was actually to shift the state of the art the other way.
I think it's in the perfect, I don't like a game that's too short, because then I feel like I don't have enough chance to do things. Yeah. There's a real Goldilocks moment where it's long enough to have all the juice, but doesn't take me forever. A whole day to play. Yeah,
exactly.
One of the criticisms of Twilight Struggle sometimes has been, the players who memorize the deck have this advantage, and I heard you address that in another podcast or an interview somewhere where you said, well, yeah, like players who've played chess more are better chess players. It's like it's the same thing, and because I had originally been thinking that I was agreeing with that criticism, and I thought your response to it was right on, and so I had to think about it's like what is it that gave me that feeling in the beginning, and I think it's one of the things I love about card-driven games is when we're first playing them and every card is something new. And once you play it, a ton, then it's like, I'm not surprised by the bear trap card or whatever. I'm hoping I draw the bear trap card, and I find it's so much more fun in the earlier iterations of your journey with the game to still be surprised by what's in the deck. What's your thinking been on that as you go along?
I mean, the truth of the matter is. And maybe I should say this in the next set of designer notes for one of these games. That first play or two is the most simulative experience that you will ever have of the game, because all of the decision makers are stumbling from one thing to another. That's what actually happens.
Yeah.
And so deck manipulation, these sort of things that expert players really enjoy, they're fun. They're fun because, it's like a skill.
It's a skill, absolutely.
But it is not simulative because no one was waiting on the Vietnam War.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. And in some ways, in Imperial Struggle, I don't feel that skilled pplayers, that the deck knowledge matters as much in that game. There's so much Twilight Struggle's got interconnectedness, but man, Imperial Struggle, it feels like any one thing you do has repercussions in 3 or 4 other places, and I don't have to sit around waiting for some combination of cards.
I think those games feel very different, and they should feel very different because the nature of the conflicts is completely different. And obviously, as you know, Imperial Struggle is a little more sandboxy, right? You can develop your own strategy, and the game is not going to
drive you in a direction.
Yeah. Twilight Struggle, you don't have that virtue. When those scoring cards come up, that's what's important. But we were deliberately trying to turn it a little bit on its head because Britain and France, because of distance, capabilities of communication, how long it took just to do things in the 17th and 18th centuries, they're not quite, it's not as a reactive an experience for those two great powers. Yes, they are in a life and death struggle, but it meanders.
Right. The reaction might come 3 months later.
No one is pushing the atomic clock up during
Were you thinking of changing the nature of what we were talking about earlier about memorizing the deck and the way it seems to be less important for? Well, I don't know. My buddy Will, he's played Imperial Struggle 40 times, so he probably does have the decks memorized. But was that a conscious thing? This has been a bit of a criticism. Let's show these guys we can do it another way, and
yes,
did.
Absolutely. That was from the get-go the intent. We're gonna divorce there were 2 bits, right? So deck knowledge is extremely important, and this kind of grouse about, I got an unlucky draw, and therefore, so I mean, it's kind of nonsense, and the reason it's nonsense is the same 10 people win all the tournaments.
Yeah, totally. It's I got a friend, I used to play poker a lot, and I had a buddy who's all night I had the second best hand. It's you got to turn those second best hands into the best hand.
Exactly.
There's that bluff thing.
Right. So we were conscious about trying to get at the same sort of feel. I mean, it's still a card-driven game, but approach it a different way and, give people a different experience. As you are well aware, Imperial Struggle is not Twilight Struggle with tricorns. It's a
whole different beast. And I totally love it. I love that. I mean, I grapple with it, but I love that thing I described as the interconnectedness. If I'm going to go after this down here, a whole bunch of other things ripple out from that, and it changes. The board state is constantly changing from the smallest action, and I mess myself up. But part of what I love about playing games, why I like playing games with people rather than computers and AIs, is because I think the fun of games is the mistakes we make and the way we capitalize on each other's mistakes and then make our own, and our opponent that's the fun.
Yeah.
If we all play top level chess, that just sounds like a grind to me.
I totally agree. I think one other thing that is like a distinction between Imperial Struggle and Twilight Struggle is like the opportunity costs in Imperial Struggle are high because of that interconnectedness. If I'm paying too much attention over here, I am really potentially losing out.
That's right, yeah. Right.
Especially if my opponent is exploiting it.
Yeah, and that often seems to be happening. It's like if I'm focusing on Europe, it seems like my opponent is really cleaning up in the Caribbean or something. It's like, what did I miss? Whoops. You and Ananda Gupta,
yes.
I don't think it's your design partner. Has the way you design games, have you devolved into sort of roles sometimes I've talked informally with David Thompson, and he works a lot with Trevor Benjamin, and he said for that specific partnership, it's like I do this, he does the that, and do you and Ananda have a similar thing, or is it still pretty kind of like working on it all together all at once?
It is. So when I work with Ananda, it's different than when I work with Christian, who I did 1960 with, and several other games. In that Ananda and I are both like history nerds, so we both care about that piece. Whereas some of my other co-designers have been more like mathematician types, and so I'm the history guy and they do the math. With Ananda and I, we have tended with projects, this is pretty much always the way. One of the reasons I like having a co-designer is because I like to be responsible to somebody else, and that helps me meet deadlines.
Right, I totally get it.
So in most cases, we will just divvy up the work and be like, hey, I'm going to work on the cards, you work on the map, or that, and then, and in 2 weeks we'll meet again and
switch.
Right,
whatever.
exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Speaking of cards in the map, I'm very impressed with both games in terms of their graphic presentation and their user interfaces. I know Imperial Struggle, some people find it fiddly, but at first I thought it was a better game on Vassal because but I actually prefer to play it on the table now because I can see the whole thing, and that makes a big difference. And it really feels like some thought has been made so that you can kind of look, and you're not looking at like what's in a hand or what you're like. You see what the state of the world is from a top-down look. Where do you guys come from that to get to that level of user interface?
Well, so the circumstance in Twilight Struggle is Mark Simonich really took our playtest maps and sort of translated them, and it is a little more literal to what the playtest stuff looked like. I mean, it's better graphically, obviously, but the innovation. If you saw our playtest map and I had it set up here, you could play Twilight Struggle on it, no problem.
Right.
Terry, I think, was like a genius with what he did with
Terry Leeds.
Yeah, Leeds. With what he did with Imperial Struggle, because the playtests were like, we had separate little. You and I were, there were four maps.
Boxes.
Yeah, exactly.
Instead of the whole world.
Right, instead of the whole world, and it wasn't as good. And the way he both integrated it so that it looks like a 17th century map with kind of the sub-regions pulled out.
Yep.
And it's at the same time, even though it looks busy initially, once you play on it, you're like, oh, this map is genius.
Yeah, he is genius, and my big grouse about maps is generally that they're too fussy, that they're too pretty and they lose functionality. But he's got that thing where he can make it pretty, and yet everything is still like the things that you need are constantly
right
popping
there.
out at you.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I was playing a game the other night. I really liked the game, but on the whole map they'd used this like super 19th century script font, and it's like, well, is that an F or an S? I don't know. Just tell me what that is, please.
Yeah, the squinting phase is not fun.
No, and I liked how many young people were seeing at this particular convention, but there's a lot of us are in our glasses phase of life.
Sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
So, you've got two other the smaller Twilight Struggle games. Do you have any more of those planned, or?
So I'm working on the P500 one now is Twilight Struggle South Asian Monsoon, and everything that I'm trying to do with these smaller games is sort of rectify something that I know is wrong with Twilight Struggle.
Oh.
So
will you tell us what that is that you think is wrong?
Yeah, absolutely. So with Red Sea, I lived through the Horn of Africa crisis. I was alive, totally conscious for the famines, all of it. I remember the news reports, and I knew we needed a card. And originally, my idea in one of the little expansions we'd done was to throw in a Horn of Africa card that was kind of like the Southeast Asian scoring, like a one-time scoring.
One-time scoring, right.
And as kind of a COVID project, I was like, well, so much for the one-time scoring card. We'll just make a little game out of it, and it will serve this other function that I know is true. A ton of people have bought Twilight Struggle on its reputation, and it sits on a shelf unplayed.
Right.
And I wanted to provide some mechanism to let people be introduced to the system, and you've got a friend who you think might be interested, but you don't want to subject them to the 3-hour thing,
right.
And so that was it. So that was Red Sea. This, as much as I like the China card is sort of a pun, really. It's not an actual simulative thing.
Right.
So India, Pakistan, China in Twilight Struggle does not work correctly. It is not simulating the way the Cold War played out in South Asia.
Right.
So this game will fix that.
So it feels then like what you're saying is Twilight Struggle had to sort of like sand the edges off a few areas.
Indeed.
And when we make these smaller games, like, now we're going to get these.
Yeah.
We're going to get the smaller chunk absolutely right. Instead.
You'll get some real granularity, and there's like good things and bad things about that. With the history in Red Sea, people might remember the Ethiopian famine, but most people don't know anything about those conflicts, and the names are unfamiliar and that sort of thing. Now, for me personally, I love playing a game where I don't know anything about any of the actors, and then I'm like, oh, it's a thing of discovery.
You get to learn as a bonus to play.
Precisely.
Yeah.
But, for some people, they like the familiarity of Twilight Struggle, where all of the cards that they're playing are things they remember from, either their lives or history books or whatever. And so you don't get quite that same connection with that. I would say South Asian Monsoon is somewhere in the middle, because like all of the actors there are important names of the 20th century. Mao, Nehru, Khrushchev, all the usual suspects are there. But there are a lot of details that people are probably unfamiliar with, like the genocide of communists that occurred in Indonesia, and that sort of thing.
Right,
and things worth knowing.
Right. So you get so it's like you make it palatable enough to get in the door, and then a little crunchy.
Yes. A little vegetable snuck in.
A little vegetable snuck in. Do you have others? Do you have other games that you are? Do you plan to do more of these smaller, bite-sized Twilight Struggles, for lack of a better word?
I mean, we'll probably continue to do them as long as their demand. Jason Carr is working on one where I will be the backseat driver and he'll be the kind of lead.
He'll design and you'll develop more like.
And I think Ananda is going to work on one in Latin America, South America, because it gets sort of it's not that it's not in Twilight Struggle, it is, but it gets sort of a short shrift because it's those are all kind of late war events, and people don't even make it to the late war most often, so it deserves a little more of a magnifying glass.
Well, that makes total sense. You might as well keep doing it as long as people want to keep playing it, right?
Yeah, that's right. And there was there was some sort of built up demand for more.
Totally, and unlike a lot of I can't think of games that, well, you probably, if there are, that you can probably think of it, but I like total Twilight Struggle ripoffs they didn't seem to proliferate. Like, it seems like the field is still open for you to use your system and get more mileage out of it.
I mean, I have to. I don't know why. I mean, there are, of course, several games that are sort of inspired by Twilight Struggle.
Yeah, I can think of a couple, but not.
Yeah, but not like what has happened with Volko and Coin, or Volko in Levian Campaign,
right,
where there's Volko's now Rembrandt, and he's got a whole factory of people.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Discord has become his atelier or whatever. Yeah.
So yeah, we don't have that scenario, and I guess if it's good or bad or indifferent, I don't know. But anyway, there are enough Twilight Struggle players that we can give them a little bit of.
There's more Twilight Struggle players than just about any other kind of player, so you have no problem there. So what about the Imperial Struggle system? Do you see any future for that, or does that feel like such a one-off? Like, it's just
I don't think it's a one-off, and the original thing, the subject that we were really trying to get to in that game is the interrelationship between war and peace. And a lot of war games, they have to tell you that something is important because you never get to see why that particular city or that port or whatever, why does it matter? Right. Well, it's got a star on it. That's why I know it matters.
It's worth 4 VP, dude.
Exactly.
It's right there.
What are you, an idiot? Yeah. So the thing that I love about Imperial Struggle is that you don't need a star on that. You know that fortress is important because it is going to come up again and again and again and again. And once you lose it or it gets reduced, your life is misery.
Yeah.
And there are, for sure, other conflicts that fit into that space, and but how many other kind of globe-spanning 100-year war conflicts are there? There are not that many more, so we can do a few more. But
but the fact that there's any more, that's wait till I tell Will, he's going to go to the moon. And Ananda's still on board to explore that with you, and that's all
sure.
good. Yeah. And in terms of now, in your other games, making of a president, the things that aren't with Ananda, do you always work with someone else, or?
Well, Red Sea was not with anybody else, right, but that was a COVID thing. But everything else has been with another co-designer, and it's not that I actually have to have one. It just ends up making my follow through is better.
I hear you. I need a poke with a sharp stick quite often. Are you working with somebody else on something else now? Like, what's the other? You got the thing on the P500 with GMT, but that's pretty much wrapped. I would imagine. Has it gone to art yet, or
no?
So you're not there yet. Okay, so you've still got some playtesting.
We still got playtesting.
Okay,
for sure.
So you got that. Do you have other designs that are?
Well, so by illustration of why I should always have a co-designer, the thing that I've been working on for several years now is a game that was inspired by Al Berry's High Treason,
I love that game.
That game is brilliant.
And like Al Berry, like where's he from? How did he pick Louis Riel?
I have no idea, because you would think he was a Canadian, but he's not.
That's my point. It's like Louis Riel is in my blood and bones. Like this is junior high level stuff for us, completely unknown south of the border.
Yeah, I knew nothing about it until I played that game. But a very fascinating conflict. And Al he's a lawyer, and so we have that sort of thing in common. And my first instinct was to try and do something with Al. And I think our views on the law are different, or what's important in the law are different. So the game I've been working on is the treason trial of Aaron Burr. And, after he shoots Alexander Hamilton, things actually get weirder, not less weird.
Right.
If I'd had my druthers, I'd have just ported Al's system. But the difficulty with Al's game is that it's based on kind of British colonial law at the time, which didn't require unanimity of juries. There were only 6 people on the jury, and all of these other things. So you can't do a direct port because you have to convince 12 people, and it has to be unanimous in that sort of thing.
Right.
So that said, I think it's a really fascinating story. The Aaron Burr treason trial. He was tried for treason, and he was Vice President of the United States. So we have precedent for treasonous executives.
Yeah. And it's like it's now's the time to get it out the door.
Exactly right. Well, it's fresh in people's minds.
That's right.
And the crazy thing about that trial, I mean, there's so many weird things about it. Honestly, first, that it's the Vice President of the United States. Secondly, that because Thomas Jefferson was cheap and hated the federal judiciary, he insisted that all the Supreme Court justices ride circuit, meaning that they were not just the Supreme Court, they would also hear regular court
They were
cases.
circuit court judges as well.
Yeah, exactly. So the
crazy.
Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court is the trial judge in
this case.
And John Marshall happens to be Thomas Jefferson's cousin, and they hate each other. So it's like on and on and on and on.
Well, I'm just thinking if that had lasted, if Clarence Thomas would be driving his RV around the circuit.
Yes, unfortunately, is quite nice RV apparently.
Yeah, that's right. Where the loan was forgiven. Well, I look forward to that because I like Al's game. I've been in contact with him a little bit, and your statement about maybe you have a little different approaches to the law or whatever. I think I know where you're going there. I understand that, but I'm interested to see what he does next too. Just because that game was.
He's a great human being and a fine designer, and he is. He keeps designing stuff that I want to play. So I'm excited. About
that. That's the way I feel about it too. Yeah. Well, apart from designing, speaking of what you like to play, what's you said you and Ananda had a big interest in card-driven games.
Yeah.
Is that still what you like to play the most, or?
Yeah, I mean,
do you get to play a lot still, or?
I do try and play. I mean, I think it's important for game designers to try and stay up with the state of the art, and that means play other people's stuff, not your stuff.
I totally agree, but I talk to designers who say, "Oh, I just don't play anymore," and it's like,
I don't think it's a good idea.
Yeah.
And I have encountered designs where I'm like, you've been playing too much of your own stuff, and you need to see what other people are doing.
Yeah, you've gone up your own bottom.
Now, exactly. So unfortunately and fortunately, I spend a lot of time at conventions, and I do therefore try and play as much as possible. And the weird thing about modern war game design or historical game design is that your inspiration for a mechanism can come from anywhere. It doesn't. I don't have to steal and probably don't very much steal from my peers and colleagues at GMT. I'm mostly stealing from some Euro stupid thing that I
totally.
the game might be dumb, but it's got this one clever thing that would work better.
I think as historical gamers, we often complain about Euros in that it feels like the theme is pasted on, and there's no relationship between form and function. But if you can find a function that serves or find a form that serves your function, man, that's worth stealing, because
exactly.
The mechanisms are cool. Just
precisely,
we want to use them better.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that has led to this great sort of renaissance in conflict simulation that we see. There are a ton of great games being designed on weird subjects that would never have, a game on the transition of the Philippines from an autocrat to a democracy that would never have.
Or Guelphs versus Ghibellines.
Yes,
in the
exactly.
1200s in Spain. It's like
you could have waited your whole life for those games, and now we're getting them. So that is fantastic. And there is something else I think super interesting that is happening on the margins. I have a lot of old white guy Eurogamer friends who were dedicated, like from the get-go, from when Settlers showed up to now, Euro guys, who have given up on Euros and have switched to wargaming because they think that this is where the innovation is.
Right. I can see that, and I would assume that they're also. You can get at something a little bit deeper.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be long and hard, but that, what I said before, the link of form and function, when they serve the same purpose, all of a sudden you're getting a richer experience.
Right.
And it goes back to what you were talking before about when we're doing historical games and you're actually slipping a few vegetables in. I mean, some people are going to do a game or play a game and they're going to know all the history and it's going to be great. But most people are going to learn a little something somewhere along the way. And I'm sure that's got to be part of the attraction for the guys who are coming over from the Euros as well.
Absolutely. And the great thing about a war game or a historical game is that it has a built-in narrative arc, right? You're always telling a story.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have this rinse, wash, repeat thing that you experience in a lot of Euros. And since our brains are set up to absorb stories through millions of years of evolution, when you tell something in story form, it sticks in your head better than any other way.
Yeah, that's the way we make sense of the world.
Right.
It's, in my other life as an actor, that's the
your whole thing.
That's the whole thing. It's like, this is how we communicate. This is how we make sense of what's going on around
Since
us.
we were sitting in front of a fire pit, talking about mammoths.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Or my favorite New Yorker cartoon from a couple years ago. It's two guys in ratted suits sitting around a fire in a post-apocalyptic sort of landscape, and the one guy says to the other, "Yeah, but for a while there, we really increased shareholder value." Do you have design, like, favorite designers that have not so much inspired how you design, but like you'll always play their games no matter what, like the sort of like, this guy designs in my wheelhouse?
So, I mean, I think you would always have to give credit where credit is due in terms of the first guy who was really pounding on this space of integrating Euro design with historical theme is Martin Wallace. That guy, and he's produced some brilliant games. The rules have not always been amazing, but the games are fantastic. And so him, I always give credit to Mark Herman, because without We the People, I probably would have dropped out of wargaming altogether, because I had just reached the point where I'm like,
no more Hex Encounter. You need something new.
Hit a wall, and I think unfortunately the Eurogamers may have been hitting a similar wall with worker placement, but whatever. And one that will seem weird, but I just admire so much what he's able to do, is Michael Schacht, who is he designed Zularetto, which won Spiel des Jahres, but he's done a bunch of games that seem super light. But what I admire about his designs is that all of them are a binary mechanism. It's this or this, yes or no. And all of his game designs function like that. or almost all, but he is able to imbue that yes or no decision with layer and layer and layer of strategic decision making. So yes or no is cool, and I can play yes or no with my 10-year-old, or I can play it with you. My 10-year-old will not see layer 2, 3, and 4,
right?
But you and I can,
right.
And so we can all play together, and we can all, be competent at it. But there's these additional layers of strategy if you're able to take advantage of them.
It's like chess is like,
yes.
well, it is one move at a time, but it isn't one move
yes.
at a time.
Precisely.
Right.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So that I like a lot of people. Obviously, Volko's kind of a genius, and his capacity to come up with brand new systems is mind-blowing to me.
What is it with that guy where he doesn't just design a game, he designs a series?
Yes, right out the box. And then suddenly...
I said to him the other day, because I was interviewing somebody about Levy and Campaign, and I said, I think maybe Volko wanted to do something about Nevsky, about the battle on the ice and all that stuff. And it just turned, and then he went, I could port this into other things, and he had another system. And my pal said, no, I think maybe it was the opposite. I think maybe he had this system, and he decided Nevsky was the first place to put it. And then we happened to be talking to Volko online, and Volko said, yeah, your buddy's right. I had this, I came up with the system, and then I figured out where I was going to put it. It's like, that's next level.
Yeah, for sure. And what is great about Volko is that he's always trying to say something in everything he does. He's very deliberate. And so that, and also sort of trying to push the hobby in certain directions. Like, why is logistics not really part of wargaming, even though it's the whole thing? It's the whole thing in a way.
Yeah.
And so, here he is illustrating it's a whole thing, and highly frustrating.
Yeah, totally. I'm constantly starving my lords and having them to tell bugger off because I didn't. I never learned my lesson.
No sleds? What do you mean no sleds?
Yeah. Well, and the thing about you said about Mark Herman and the CDGs and how that launched everything, I felt the same way with Courtney Allen, with area impulse games and Upfront. Those games was like, this is where that's what got me off of. I still play hex encounter games, but those area impulse games, it was like, this is so interactive and so back and forth that it just felt like this is the new direction for me.
Well, Courtney Allen, clearly a genius, and it's weird. It's weird to me that a lot of incredibly innovative, clever, deep, smart systems have always existed in wargaming. We always talk about wargaming like it was this monolithic hex encounter thing, which it never was.
No, I totally
and having
agree.
lived through it, I know for sure it never was that. But the weird part is so many great innovations just get left on the cutting room floor, but never, they're in one game and we never see them again.
Whoa, the Upfront example, there have been games that have tried, but nobody's ever, that guy just had it in a bottle right there in one box.
Exactly. And it was brilliant.
It was totally brilliant. And it was just like, they were marketing it at the time as Squad Leader as a card game. But it's like, no, it's its own thing. It's perfect.
And as far as I'm concerned, much better than Squad Leader, and weirdly more simulative of what tactical warfare.
And it did all that stuff. The cards were so before Mark's cards. These cards were so multi-purpose.
Exactly.
They had a variety of different random number systems on every card and different letter systems. And then Courtney Allen is he left the business years ago, and I don't know where he lives.
I don't either.
I don't know, but it's just like when people say who's your favorite designer, and I say Courtney Allen. A lot of young people are like, who?
Yeah.
It's
but it is unfair because he deserves more laurels and is an important founding father for the wargaming hobby.
Mike Ranella wouldn't have a career without him. No slag to Mike Ranella. I play his games all the time, but it's he's taken the Courtney Allen area impulse and run with it, and he's probably got a dozen games that are built on that chassis.
Yes, yeah. Exactly.
Well, this has been great. I think
My pleasure.
it's so nice to talk to you and meet you. And thank you for showing up on my on that YouTube interview I did with Harold that time.
Yeah,
that was
that's
very,
right.
That was very funny.
Yeah.
That was good. Well, good to meet you, and
My pleasure.
best of
Fred.
luck.
Thank you.
Pretty great guy. And involved in all sorts of areas of the hobby besides his own designs. He's on the advisory board for San Diego Histcon. He's involved in the history gaming scene in his hometown, and on top of it all, he's got a wicked sense of humor. If you ever get a chance to see him speak at a convention or anything, don't miss it. Bouquets. Well, it's a no-brainer this time to give a shout-out to Harold Buchanan and all the folks who create San Diego Histcon. It had great gaming, great people, it was in a great location close to hotels, and great food. Everything ran smoothly. So smoothly that it's easy to overlook how hard folks must have worked to make that all happen. So kudos to all. Parting shots. Well, no real shot to take this month. As I've now got 2 years in the can, it's worthwhile to reflect on what's worked on the podcast and what hasn't worked. I had one episode early on where the audio of my guest wasn't the best. I worked very hard to clean it up, but it was still disappointing. I heard from a lot of you about that one, and I get it. Crappy audio will make me give up on a podcast if it doesn't improve as well. So sorry about that, and I continue to work on it. One thing many listeners comment on when they first start with my podcast is that they like the signal-to-noise ratio. That is, since I host the show by myself, there's no chit-chat with a co-host about how the kids are doing, what the wife is up to, or why my favorite sports team is a heartbreak. Yes, again. They like it that the episodes are fairly focused. On the other hand, I did have a writer let me know that me being alone is a drawback, as I'm kind of dull if he's not interested in the topic, which is fair enough. For now, I'm hoping to keep riding this line mostly on my own, but sprinkling in some interviews. Who knows, maybe I'll invite a guest host from time to time just to spice things up. Episode length is a challenge. I have some listeners who write in to say they love the show, but wish it was longer. They want 2-hour-long episodes or more. But then others write in to complain about the length sometimes, so I'm not sure how I'll settle this. I'll definitely endeavor not to have 2 hours on a single subject, but sometimes the full episode is going to go long. That's just the way it is. Other times, I have trouble filling 50 minutes, so I'll have to leave this one up in the air for now. Most of you say you like the interviews, so I'll keep doing them when I can. I just have to be careful to limit how often I let them crowd out the dives into specific games, as pretty much everyone has said they enjoy that part of the podcast. I have to say I'm sorry there isn't one this episode, but there was just too much to cram in. I had a couple folks ask for more book reviews. Honestly, I mention every history-related book I read now, but I read a lot of nonfiction as well, so I don't know how much I can increase that section, but I'll see. I'll try to remember books I've read in the past if they apply to specific games as well. All in all, I have to say the feedback has been positive and encouraging, so I'll keep at it. Podcast burnout is a real thing, and I definitely feel it from time to time, but for now, the ship is still sailing. So, thanks again for listening. You can, as always, reach me at grant@pushingpartcardboard.com at the website or on our Discord server. I'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to go to the website again and find podcast surveys. There's another survey for this episode. No prize this time, but I'll see what I can do going forward. Mrs. Pushing Cardboard would surely love to see me thin the collection via prize draws. So long.